moment I'll never forget isn't the dance itself. It's the way he smiled at her. That slow, private smile that used to be mine. The kind of smile that says, I know you. That says, you're safe with me. That says, this is our secret world. He gave it to her, right there in our backyard, under the string lights I had spent 2 hours hanging that afternoon, with 60 of our closest friends watching and our daughter Lily standing 15 feet away, holding a glass of sparkling cider and wearing the yellow dress she'd picked out especially for Mom and Dad's anniversary party. I stood at the edge of the patio, and I watched my husband dance with the woman he'd been sleeping with for God knows how long. And I didn't scream. I didn't throw my wine glass. I didn't march over there and yank her by her highlighted hair. I just stood very still, the way you go still when something inside you quietly breaks. Not with a crash, but with that soft, final sound of something that will never go back together the way it was. I turned around and walked inside. And that was the beginning of the end of everything Marcus thought he'd built. But let me back up, because you need to understand what I thought I had before you can understand what it cost me to lose it, and what it cost him to take it. Marcus and I met in the fall of 2009 at a happy hour in downtown Chicago that neither of us had really wanted to attend. My coworker Jennifer had practically dragged me out of the office, insisting I needed to stop eating sad desk salads and talk to actual humans. His friend Brandon had done the same to him, for different reasons I wouldn't learn about until later. We ended up next to each other at the bar purely by accident. He reached for the last bar napkin at the same moment I did, and we both laughed, and something about the way he laughed made me think, okay, this one might be different. He was 31, I was 28. He was an account manager at a mid-sized logistics company, steady and practical. The kind of man who remembered to change his oil and knew how to fix a leaky faucet. I was working in marketing for a healthcare company, always a little scattered, always 3 steps ahead in my head and 2 steps behind everywhere else. We balanced each other, or so I believed. He slowed me down. I sped him up. We dated for 2 years before he proposed. He did it at the restaurant where we'd had our first real date. Not the happy hour bar, but a little Italian place on North Clark Street called Rosetta's, where the bread came warm and the candles were always slightly too drippy and everything smelled like garlic and old wood. He got down on one knee between the appetizers and the main course, and the whole restaurant clapped. And I cried. And Jennifer, who I had called from the bathroom on our 3rd date to say, I think I actually like this one, cried when I called her from the car afterward. We got married in June of 2013. Outdoor ceremony just outside the city, at a venue that had an old converted barn and acres of wildflower fields. My mother wore cornflower blue and cried through the entire vow exchange. Marcus's mother, Karen, wore a shade of cream that I'd specifically asked people not to wear. But I let it go because I was happy, and because I genuinely liked her then, and because it seemed like a small thing. It seemed like so many things were small things back then. Our daughter Lily was born in 2015. She came into the world at 6:47 in the morning, screaming like she had an opinion about it. And Marcus held her first while they stitched me up, and I watched his face change in a way I had never seen a human face change before. He looked undone. He looked like a man who had just discovered something he didn't know he needed. He cried, actually cried, and Marcus was not a man who cried easily. I filed that away as proof of something, as evidence of who he was at his core. We bought our house in the suburbs in 2016, a 4-bedroom colonial in a quiet neighborhood in Naperville, the kind of place where the HOA sent passive-aggressive letters about lawn height and people left casseroles on your porch when you had a baby or a death in the family. It had a big backyard with mature oak trees and a patio that I immediately started planning to make beautiful. I planted hydrangeas along the fence, I bought string lights, I got a fire pit from Costco, and spent one entire Saturday afternoon assembling it, while Lily, who was barely walking, toddled around in the grass, pulling up fistfuls of dirt. Life was good. I want to be clear about that, because sometimes when you're telling a story like this, people assume you were miserable the whole time and just didn't see it. But I wasn't miserable. I was genuinely, specifically happy in the way that feels earned. The way happiness feels when you've worked for something and you can see it all around you. I had a daughter I adored. I had a house that felt like home. I had a husband who came home for dinner most nights and coached Lily's soccer team on Saturday mornings and made really good coffee and remembered that I liked the crusts cut off my sandwiches even though I was a grown adult who definitely didn't need the crusts cut off. I had a career that was going well. I'd moved into a director-level role at a Chicago-based healthcare marketing firm, managing a team of 8. Pulling in a salary that let me pay half the mortgage and still put money into Lily's 529 and my own 401k without panicking every month. We weren't rich, but we were stable. We were building something. For our 10th anniversary, I planned a party. Not a dinner for 2, a real party. The kind I knew Marcus loved, where the backyard fills up with people and there's a playlist and good food and everyone stays too late. I spent 3 weeks organizing it. I hired a caterer, a woman from our neighborhood named Linda, who did catering on the side and made the most incredible brisket you've ever tasted. I ordered a custom cake from the bakery downtown, white with gold lettering that said 10 years. I strung lights across the entire back patio. I bought a new dress, emerald green, because Marcus had once told me years ago that green was his favorite color on me, and I still remembered that, and still wanted him to notice me. I wanted it to be perfect. And for about the first 2 hours, it was. The backyard was full of people we loved. Jennifer was there with her husband David, Marcus's work friends, his college friends, our neighbors. Lily was running around in her yellow dress, cheeks flushed, delighted to be allowed to stay up past 9 on a school night. The music was exactly right. The brisket was exactly right. Marcus had his arm around me when people arrived, and he said into my ear, "You did good, babe. This is really great." I believed him. Why wouldn't I? It was around 9:30 when I noticed her. She'd come with a group of Marcus's work colleagues, which explained why I didn't recognize her immediately. Her name, I would later learn, was Tara. She was maybe 34, 35, dark hair, sharp features, the kind of effortless attractiveness that looks expensive without looking like it's trying. She was wearing a red wrap dress that had absolutely no business being at a backyard anniversary party in the suburbs. I remember thinking, vaguely, who is she? And then getting pulled into a conversation with my neighbor about the school district's new reading curriculum and forgetting about her for a while. And then I heard the music shift to something slower, and I turned around, and there was Marcus, on the patio I had built, under the lights I had hung, dancing with the woman in the red dress, his hand on the small of her back, her face tilted up toward his. And that smile, that slow, private smile that used to be mine. The world didn't spin. My heart didn't stop. I just went very, very still. Lily was 15 feet away, watching her father dance with a stranger. I set down my wine glass on the nearest table, very carefully, and I walked inside. I went to our bedroom and I sat on the edge of the bed in my emerald green dress, and I breathed. And I made a decision. Not in a dramatic flash, but quietly. The way you make the decisions that actually change your life. I was not going to cry. I was not going to confront him at the party, not with Lily there, not with 60 people watching. I was going to be calm. I was going to be smart. I had absolutely no idea yet how bad it really was. I thought I was dealing with a flirtation, maybe an emotional affair. I thought I was about to have the worst month of my marriage. I didn't know I was about to discover that the man sleeping in my bed had been living an entirely different life for the past 2 years, and that untangling it was going to require every ounce of strength I had. A divorce attorney named Patricia, and one very decisive conversation with Marcus's boss that Marcus never, ever saw coming. But that night, I just sat on the bed and breathed. Outside, through the window, I could still hear the music playing. The guests left around midnight. I heard them from the bedroom, the goodbyes, the car doors, the gradual fading of voices and music until the backyard went quiet. I heard Marcus cleaning up, or pretending to, the clink of glasses being stacked, the sound of the back door opening and closing. I heard him check on Lily, heard her sleepy murmur through the wall. And then I heard him come down the hall toward our room, and I lay in the dark, and I breathed, and I decided I was going to say nothing. Not yet. Not tonight. He came in and undressed in the dark, thinking I was asleep. I watched him through half-closed eyes, the familiar shape of him, the way he set his watch on the nightstand, the way he exhaled when he finally got into bed. He was quiet for a moment. Then he rolled over, away from me, and within 10 minutes, I could hear his breathing slow and deepen. He slept fine. He slept just fine. I lay awake until 4 in the morning. I want to tell you I spent those hours formulating a brilliant plan. I didn't. I spent them cycling through the same 3 thoughts on a loop. Did that actually happen? What do I do? And is Lily okay? Because that was the part that kept snagging. Not even the betrayal itself, as enormous as it was, but the image of my daughter standing 15 feet away with her glass of sparkling cider, watching her father dance with a woman who was not her mother. Did she understand what she was seeing? She was 9 years old. 9-year-olds understand more than we think they do. In the morning, Marcus made coffee. He made it the same way he always did. Ground the beans, used the French press, brought me a cup without being asked. He set it on my nightstand and said, "Morning," like it was any other Sunday. Like the night before had been entirely unremarkable. Like 60 people had not watched him press his hand to the small of another woman's back under the lights I had hung. I said, "Morning," back. I took the coffee. I looked at him over the rim of the mug and I thought, very clearly, I need information before I say anything. I need to know exactly what I'm dealing with. That decision, to wait, to watch, to gather, probably saved me from losing half of what I eventually protected. But it cost me something too. It cost me 3 more days of pretending. On Monday, I called Jennifer from my car in the parking garage at work. I sat in the dark with the engine off, and I told her everything. She was quiet for a long time after I finished, which was how I knew it was serious. Jennifer was never quiet. "Okay," she said finally. "Do you want me to come over?" "No, not yet. I need you to help me think." "Who is she? The woman in the red dress?" "I don't know yet. She came with his work people." Another pause. "Ashley." Her voice was careful in a way that made my stomach drop. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to not panic." That's a terrible way to start a sentence. "I know. I'm sorry." she exhaled. Was her name Tara? Dark hair, mid-30s, kind of aggressively pretty? The coffee I'd had that morning turned to concrete in my stomach. How do you know that name? David mentioned her, a while ago. Marcus brought her to a work happy hour. David was there. He said... She stopped. He said Marcus introduced her as someone from his office. But the way he described how Marcus acted around her, I remember thinking it seemed off. I almost said something to you. I should have said something to you. When was this? Ashley. Jennifer. When? About 8 months ago. 8 months. 8 months ago, I had been planning Lily's birthday party. 8 months ago, Marcus and I had gone to Cabo for a long weekend, while Lily stayed with his mother, Karen. 8 months ago, I had bought new lingerie for that trip and felt genuinely happy, genuinely present, genuinely connected to my husband. I sat in that parking garage for another 20 minutes after I hung up with Jennifer. Then I went upstairs and did my job, because I had a team of 8 people who needed me to function. And functioning was the one thing I had always been good at when everything else was falling apart. That night, I waited until Marcus was in the shower, and then I went through his phone. I'm not proud of it. I want to be honest about that. I'm not someone who goes through people's phones, or I wasn't before that night. But I was also not going to walk into a conversation with my husband and be blindsided. Not when Jennifer's voice had gone that careful, that quiet. I needed the truth, and I needed it before he could spin it. What I found in his phone was worse than I expected. Not because of the volume of it, but because of the tone of it. Affairs have texting patterns. I know that now in a way I didn't know then. There's usually a period of excitement, then a period of secrecy, then a period of settled comfort that is, in its own way, the most devastating thing to find. Because comfort means duration. Comfort means this is not new. The texts between Marcus and Tara were comfortable. They had shorthand. They had inside jokes. She texted him things like, "Your meeting run late again?" with a knowing tone that suggested she knew his schedule. He texted her things like, "Thinking about last Thursday and can't stop." There was a text from 4 months ago, a Thursday, where she'd written, "I love you," and he had written back, "I know, me too." Not "I love you too." Not even the full thing, just, "I know, me too." Like he was too careful to commit the whole sentence, but not careful enough to stop. 2 years. The texts went back 2 years. I put the phone back exactly where I'd found it. I went to the bathroom, locked the door, and I sat on the edge of the tub, and I held my own face in my hands, and I let myself have exactly 5 minutes. 5 minutes to feel everything. The betrayal, the humiliation, the grief, the rage. 5 minutes to be completely undone. Then I washed my face with cold water, dried it on a towel, and unlocked the door. Marcus was just coming out of the shower, a towel around his waist. He looked at me. "You okay? You look pale." "Headache," I said. He nodded, reached past me for his deodorant, and said, "I've got an early call tomorrow. You mind if we keep it quiet tonight?" "Sure," I said. "No problem." I went to bed. He went to bed. We lay 2 feet apart in the same king-sized mattress we'd bought together 6 years ago. And I stared at the ceiling, and I understood, for the first time, that the marriage I thought I was in had not existed for at least 2 years. The confrontation came on Wednesday. I had not planned for Wednesday. I had planned to wait until I had spoken to a lawyer, until I had done at least some preliminary research into what divorce actually looked like in Illinois, what I was entitled to, what the process was. But Wednesday happened because of Lily. And when your kid is involved, plans go out the window. Lily came home from school quiet. She ate dinner in 3 bites and asked to be excused. I followed her up to her room and found her sitting on her bed with her knees pulled to her chest, staring at the window. "Baby," I said, "what's going on?" She looked at me with those serious gray eyes she'd had since she was born. Marcus's eyes, which was a fact that would always be bittersweet from this point forward. And she said, "Mom, who was that lady Dad was dancing with at the party?" My throat closed. I sat down on the bed next to her. "What do you mean?" "She was hugging him," Lily said. "Not like dancing hugging, like the way you hug someone when you really know them." She paused. "Emma's dad did that with someone who wasn't Emma's mom. And then Emma's parents got divorced." 9 years old. I said it before, and I'll say it again. 9-year-olds understand more than we think they do. "I don't want you to worry about that," I said, which was both a lie and the only true thing I could tell her right then. "But who was she?" "She's someone from Dad's work," I said. "They were just being friendly." Lily looked at me for a long moment with those gray eyes. She didn't say anything else. But I could tell she didn't believe me. And the fact that she didn't believe me, that she was 9 years old and could already see through the version of events I was trying to construct for her, broke something open in me that the texts hadn't quite broken. Marcus was in the kitchen when I came back downstairs. He was rinsing a glass, his back to me, and I stood in the doorway and I said, "We need to talk." He turned around. Something shifted in his face, quick, almost imperceptible, but I knew his face. "Yeah?" "Not here," I said. "Lily's upstairs." We went to the back patio. It was a cool night, mid-October, and the string lights were still up from the party. I hadn't taken them down yet. They cast that warm amber light over everything, and I remember thinking distantly that I needed to take them down, that I would never be able to look at them the same way. I sat down in one of the patio chairs, and I looked at him, and I said, "Tell me about Tara." The color left his face. Not gradually. It just drained, like water going down a drain. He sat down in the chair across from me, and for a moment, he didn't say anything. He pressed his hands flat on his thighs, and I watched him cycle through his options in real time. "Ashley, don't," I said. "Don't do the thing where you ask me what I'm talking about. I went through your phone. I read the texts. I know it's been 2 years. So please, don't insult me by making me drag every syllable out of you." He was quiet for a long time. The October wind moved through the oak trees, and the string lights swayed slightly, and somewhere down the street, a dog was barking. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "How sorry?" "What?" "How sorry are you? Sorry it happened, or sorry I found out? Because those are 2 very different things, Marcus." He looked at the table. "I don't know how to answer that." "Try." Another long pause. Then, "I didn't mean for it to get this far." "But it did." "Yes." "And you brought her to our anniversary party." He didn't answer that. He couldn't, I think. There was no version of an answer that made it better. Bringing Tara to that party was either the action of a man who was spectacularly careless, or a man who had started to feel so entitled to his double life that he'd stopped being careful. Neither option was survivable for our marriage. "Is it over?" I asked. "With her?" He hesitated. 1 second too long. And that hesitation, that single, terrible second of silence, told me everything I needed to know about how this was going to go. He wasn't going to choose me. Or he hadn't yet decided, which at that point was the same thing. "I need some time," he said, "to figure out—" "No," I said. I stood up. "You've had 2 years. You don't get more time." I went back inside and up to bed, and I lay in the dark, and this time I didn't feel anything at all. The numbness was almost a relief. And underneath it, very quiet but very certain, something new had started. The cold, clear process of deciding exactly how this was going to end. I just didn't know yet that what I was about to find out would make the affair look almost simple by comparison. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. I lay in bed until 9, which I never do. And then I got up and took a shower so hot it turned my skin pink, and I stood there until the water went cold. And then I got out and sat on the bathroom floor in my towel and cried the way I hadn't let myself cry yet. Ugly, gasping, the kind of crying that makes your whole body shake. I gave myself 20 minutes. Then I got dressed, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and a pen. And I started writing down everything I knew. This is what I've always done when I'm falling apart. I make lists. I write things down. I give the chaos a shape, because if it has a shape, I can work with it. It's not healthy, probably. My therapist. I had a therapist briefly, 2 years before all of this, for something unrelated, had told me that I had a tendency to intellectualize as a way of avoiding feeling. She wasn't wrong, but she also wasn't the one sitting in a kitchen in Naperville with a cheating husband and a 9-year-old who was already asking the wrong questions. So I wrote down what I knew. 2 years, Tara, texts on his phone, "I love you," and "I know, me too." 8 months since Jennifer's husband David had noticed something off at a work happy hour. I wrote down what I didn't know. Whether they were still together, that hesitation when I'd asked, that one terrible second. Whether anyone else knew. Whether this was the first time or just the most recent instance of a pattern I hadn't seen. And then, underneath those 2 columns, I wrote a third one. What I needed to find out before I did anything irreversible. That third column was the one that saved me. The first thing I needed was a lawyer. Not to file anything yet, just to understand where I stood. In Illinois, divorce is no fault, which means adultery doesn't technically factor into the property settlement. What does factor in is marital assets, income, the length of the marriage, custody arrangements. I didn't know enough about any of that, and I couldn't afford to not know. I couldn't afford, literally could not afford, to walk into this without understanding what I was protected by and what I wasn't. I called 3 divorce attorneys that morning. 2 had openings within the week. One, a woman named Patricia, whose name I'd gotten from a friend of a friend who'd used her in a high-conflict divorce 2 years earlier, had an opening the following afternoon. I took it. I did not tell Marcus I was going. I told him I had a work thing running late. He didn't question it. He had stopped questioning much of anything, which I noted and filed away. Patricia's office was downtown Chicago, a 40th floor corner suite that looked out over the lake. She was in her early 50s, compact and precise, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a low bun and the kind of stillness that comes from having sat across from 1,000 people in the worst moments of their lives. She let me talk for 10 minutes without interrupting. When I finished, she folded her hands on the desk and asked me 3 questions. What was in both our names? What was in only his? And did I have access to our financial accounts? I knew the answer to the first question. The house, the joint checking account, the joint savings. I knew the answer to the third. Yes, I had always had access. We had always been transparent about money, or so I had believed. It was the second question that made me pause. What do you mean in only his name? Retirement accounts, Patricia said. Investment accounts. Business interests, if any. Sometimes a spouse has financial instruments the other partner doesn't know about, particularly if one person has handled most of the financial management during the marriage. I thought about it. Marcus had his 401k through his company. I knew about that. But he'd also had a financial advisor since before we got married, a college friend named Robert who managed some kind of investment portfolio for him. I had never paid much attention to it because it had felt like his separate thing, something he'd started before me, something I'd never been fully in the loop on. I'd trusted that it was fine. I'd trusted that he would tell me if it was relevant. Patricia looked at me with an expression that wasn't unkind, but was very direct. I want you to find out exactly what's in that portfolio, she said, before you have any formal conversation with your husband about separation or divorce, before he has a chance to move anything. I felt something shift in my chest, not quite fear, more like the cold, clarifying feeling of understanding that the thing you're dealing with is bigger than you thought. You think he might hide money? I think it's important that you know the full picture before any of this becomes official, she said. That's all. Get me account statements, tax returns for the last 3 years. Anything you have access to. I drove home with my hands gripping the steering wheel the entire way. The thing I hadn't wanted to consider, the thing I'd been too busy surviving the emotional wreckage to think about, was that there might be a financial dimension to this that I hadn't accounted for. That the man who had kept a 2-year affair hidden from me might also have kept other things hidden. That people who compartmentalize one part of their life sometimes compartmentalize more than one. That was the beginning of the bottom. Because until that point, as awful as everything was, I had still believed that the financial life of our marriage was straightforward, that the money was where I thought it was, that the ground under my feet, even as everything else was collapsing, was at least solid. I started pulling tax returns that night, after Lily was in bed. Marcus was watching something in the living room. I could hear the low murmur of the television, and I sat at the desk in our home office with my laptop and went through everything I could find. We filed jointly. I had always signed the returns, but Marcus had always handled the preparation. He used an accountant, a man named Gary, who I had met maybe twice at company holiday parties and who I had never had reason to think about. The returns were normal, mostly. I almost closed the laptop, but something made me look closer at the investment income line. For the last 2 years, the reported income from Marcus's portfolio had been lower than I expected. Not dramatically lower, just slightly. The kind of slightly that you wouldn't notice unless you were looking for it, unless someone had told you to look. I sent Patricia the scanned returns the next morning. Then I waited. She called me 2 days later. Her voice was measured, but I could tell she'd found something. I want to bring in a forensic accountant to look at these, she said. I can't tell you definitively yet, but there are some patterns here that I'd like a second set of eyes on before we proceed." "What kind of patterns?" "The kind that suggest there may be accounts or assets not fully reflected in your joint returns," she said. "I don't want to alarm you. I just want to be thorough." I sat in my car in the school pickup line. I was there to get Lily, and I pressed my fingers against my mouth and breathed through my nose. Outside the window, other parents were standing around talking, and a crossing guard was waving someone through, and the ordinary world was just proceeding normally around me, while mine was continuing to quietly come apart. That was the bottom. Not the party, not the texts, not even the conversation on the patio. The bottom was sitting in that school pickup line, understanding that the man I had built a life with might have been hiding money from me. That the betrayal might not be limited to the emotional. That what I had thought was a marriage had been, on multiple levels, something else entirely. Lily climbed into the car and said, "Mom, you look weird." "I'm fine, baby," I said. "You look like when you got the phone call about Grandpa," she said. Lily's grandfather, my father, had died 18 months earlier, and she had watched me get the call, had watched my face change. I turned around and looked at my daughter in her booster seat, her backpack in her lap, her gray eyes serious and steady. And something happened in me in that moment. Something shifted, the way a locked thing shifts when the right key finally turns. Because here was the thing. Lily saw me. She always saw me. And she was going to grow up watching how I handled this. She was going to learn what women do when the floor drops out. And I had a choice about what she learned. I turned back around and started the car. And I thought, okay. You want to know who I am? I'm the woman who gets up. That's who I've always been. And whatever Marcus has done, whatever he's hidden, whatever the next thing is that I'm going to find out, I'm going to get up, and I'm going to be so calm and so thorough that he will not see me coming until it is far, far too late. I called Jennifer that night after Lily was in bed. "I need a favor," I said. "I need you to find out if David knows anything else about Tara, about Marcus, anything he might not have mentioned because he didn't think it was relevant." Jennifer was quiet for a moment. "I already asked him," she said. "After you told me about the party. I didn't want to say anything until I had something concrete." My grip tightened on the phone. "And?" "David says Marcus's company has been going through some restructuring," she said carefully. "He says there were rumors, and this is just rumors, Ashley, from what David heard, that Marcus had been positioning himself for something, a new role, or maybe leaving to do something with Robert." Robert, the financial advisor, the college friend. When did these rumors start? Apparently, they've been circulating for a while. Maybe 6 months? David thought it was just career stuff, not worth mentioning. But now that I've told him what's going on, he thinks maybe it's worth you knowing. I thanked her and hung up and sat very still in the quiet house. 6 months ago. Around the same time, the investment income on our tax returns had started looking slightly lower than expected. Around the same time, though I wouldn't confirm this until later, Marcus had opened a separate account that had never appeared on a joint return at all. The pieces weren't fully in place yet. I didn't have all of them, but I had enough to understand that what was coming wasn't just a divorce. It was going to be a fight. And Marcus, who had spent 2 years underestimating what I would do when pushed, had made one critical, irreversible error. He had assumed that because I was warm, because I was the one who hung the string lights and ordered the custom cake and remembered to buy the birthday cards, I was also soft. That I would cry and rage and react, and that while I was doing that, he would have time to protect himself. He was wrong. I had already called Patricia. I had already pulled the tax returns. I had already sent the documents to a forensic accountant whose hourly rate made me wince, but who Patricia said was the best in the city. And I had done all of this without Marcus knowing, without a single raised voice, while making dinner every night and helping Lily with homework and sleeping in the same bed as the man I was building a case against. The call I was dreading, and the one I knew I had to make, was to Marcus's mother, Karen. Not because she was an ally exactly. Karen had always been complicated. She loved her son with the specific blindness of mothers who believe their children are fundamentally incapable of serious wrongdoing. But she had also, in 17 years, sometimes surprised me. And she had a relationship with Lily that I was not going to let become collateral damage if I could help it. I hadn't called her yet. I wasn't ready for that conversation. But there was another call I hadn't made. One that Patricia had mentioned almost in passing that I had been turning over in my mind for 3 days. She'd said, "If your husband's actions at work are connected to marital assets, it may be worth speaking to someone at his company. Not in an official capacity, just to understand the landscape." I had a name. David had given it to me without even realizing what he was giving me. Marcus's division head. A man who had apparently been asking questions of his own about some irregularities in Marcus's expense reporting over the last several months. A man who, according to David, had not yet found what he was looking for. I knew something that man didn't know yet. And I was starting to understand that the information I held was not just leverage. It was currency. And I had been sitting on it, waiting, being careful, while Marcus slept peacefully in our bed and texted Tara from his phone and believed with complete confidence that I was too devastated to be dangerous. I picked up my phone. I found the number, and for a long moment, I just held it, my thumb over the screen, feeling the weight of what I was about to set in motion. Because once I made this call, there was no version of events where Marcus walked away from this intact. Not his marriage, not his career, not the carefully constructed double life he had been maintaining for 2 years at my expense and Lily's. I pressed call. The line rang twice before he picked up. His name was Greg Holloway, and he was the VP of operations at Marcus's company. The man David had mentioned, the one who'd been quietly circling some irregularities in expense reporting for months. His voice was professional, measured, the voice of someone who had learned to be careful about what he said on the phone with people he didn't know. "Mr. Holloway," I said, "my name is Ashley. Marcus Webb is my husband. I think we need to have a conversation because I believe I have information that's relevant to something you've been looking for." There was a pause, not a long one. "Mrs. Webb," he said. "I think you're right." We met in person 2 days later at a coffee shop downtown, nowhere near Marcus's office. I brought printed copies of the tax returns, the specific pages Patricia had flagged, and a summary, 2 typed pages, single-spaced, of the timeline I had constructed. When the investment income started looking low, when Marcus and Robert had apparently started discussing some kind of joint venture, and the 6-month window during which all of it seemed to have been set in motion. I had not included anything about Tara. That wasn't Greg's business, and it wasn't relevant to what he needed. Greg Holloway was a trim man in his late 40s with reading glasses he kept taking on and off. He looked at my 2 pages for a long time without speaking. Then, he looked up at me over the glasses. "How did you get this?" he asked. "Joint tax returns," I said. "I've always had access." He nodded slowly. "And your attorney is aware you're sharing this?" "She is, and she's made clear that anything I provide is provided voluntarily as a marital asset disclosure, not as a whistleblower filing. That distinction is important to me." He nodded again. He was quiet for another long moment, turning his coffee cup in his hands. Then, "Mrs. Webb, I'm going to be honest with you. We've had concerns about Marcus for approximately 4 months. Nothing we could act on definitively. What you've given me here, if it checks out, fills in a gap I haven't been able to close." "I need something in return," I said. "Not money, not formal. I just need to know. When this becomes official, when whatever process you initiate moves forward, that it moves forward on your timeline, not mine. I need 2 more weeks before anything changes at his office." He studied me. 2 weeks for what? "To finish protecting myself," I said. Another pause. Then, Greg Holloway put his reading glasses back on, looked down at my 2 pages one more time, and said, "I think we can work with 2 weeks." I drove home and called Patricia from the parking garage. "I have 2 weeks," I told her. "Tell me everything we need to do." What followed was the most focused 14 days of my life. Patricia moved fast. She had already retained the forensic accountant, a precise, methodical woman named Dr. Susan Park, who, by day 4, had confirmed what the tax returns had only suggested. Marcus and Robert had been quietly siphoning value out of the investment portfolio for approximately 18 months, restructuring assets into a separate LLC that had never appeared on a joint return. The LLC was in Robert's name. The beneficial ownership was split. The total value that had been moved, Dr. Park estimated, was somewhere in the range of $340,000. $340,000. That was the number she put on paper. That was the number I sat with in Patricia's office on a Thursday afternoon while the city went on outside the window and Lake Michigan glittered in the distance. And I held myself very still and breathed through it. "He was planning to leave," I said. Not a question. Patricia looked at me steadily. "That's what the structure suggests. This kind of arrangement, a holding entity, assets moved in advance, is consistent with someone who was preparing for a significant life change and wanted to minimize what would be subject to marital division. He was going to leave me for her, and he was going to do it with money he'd hidden." "That's the picture the documents paint," she said. "Yes." I thought about the Cabo trip, the new lingerie, the way he'd put his arm around me at the party and said, into my ear, "You did good, babe." I thought about all the Sunday mornings and the French press coffee and the way he'd coached Lily's soccer team. I thought about all of it. The whole architecture of the life I thought we had. And I understood that for Marcus, at some point in the last 2 years, it had all become performance. He'd been winding down. He'd been moving money. He'd been preparing an exit. And he'd decided to do it on his schedule, not mine, and not before he'd protected himself. He had not counted on me moving first. On day 10, I filed for divorce. Patricia submitted the papers on a Tuesday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, Marcus had been served at his office. I know this because he called me at 4:15, and I let it go to voicemail, and the message he left was 6 seconds long and said nothing except my name in a tone I had never heard from him before. Not angry, not sorry, just stunned. The way a man sounds when the floor he thought was solid suddenly isn't there. I didn't call him back. I picked up Lily from school, and we went to get ice cream, and she got cookie dough, and I got mint chip, and we sat at one of the little tables by the window, and she told me about a project she was doing on the water cycle, and I listened to every word. That evening, Marcus came home. I had expected him to, and I had expected it to be bad. He came through the front door at 6:30, and his face had the particular look of a man who had been shocked and then had several hours to construct his response to the shock. Controlled anger layered over genuine fear. He'd changed out of his work clothes, which meant he'd gone somewhere in between. I didn't know where, didn't ask. "We need to talk," he said. "Lily's upstairs," I said. "Keep your voice down." He pressed his lips together. "Ashley, you filed for divorce without saying a word to me." "You had 2 years," I said. "You didn't use them." This isn't how this is supposed to go." I looked at him from across the kitchen island, and I kept my voice level, because Lily was 20 feet above our heads, and she had already seen too much. "Marcus, I know about the LLC. I know about Robert. I know about the $340,000. Patricia has the documents. Dr. Park has done the accounting. So when you talk to your attorney, and you should call your attorney tonight, please make sure he or she knows that we have the full picture." The color left his face the same way it had on the patio that October night. But this time, it didn't come back. "How?" he said. And that was it. Just that one word. "Joint tax returns," I said. "I've always had access." He stood there for a moment, and I watched him understand, really understand, that the woman he had been married to for 10 years, the woman who hung the string lights and ordered the custom cake and remembered the crusts, had spent the last 3 weeks quietly taking his life apart while he slept peacefully in the bed beside her. "I want you to go stay somewhere else tonight," I said. "I'll have your things ready in the morning. We can work out a schedule for Lily through our attorneys." He didn't argue. That was the thing I hadn't quite anticipated, that once the actual shape of what I'd done became clear to him, he wouldn't argue. He just stood there in the kitchen of the house we'd bought together, in the suburb where we'd planted hydrangeas and assembled the Costco fire pit, and he looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Or maybe like he was finally seeing what had been there the whole time, what he'd miscalculated so completely. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know," I said. He left. He went to his mother Karen's house, I found out later. He stayed there for almost a week before Karen, who surprised me, as she occasionally had over 17 years, called me. I almost didn't pick up. "Ashley," she said when I answered. Her voice was tight, like she was holding something back. "I owe you an apology." "Karen, no. Let me say it." I raised him. Whatever he's done, and he told me some of it, not all of it, I suspect. I raised him, and I know what kind of man he became, and I'm sorry it happened in your house, to you and Lily. She paused. "Lily can come here whenever she wants. That doesn't change. Whatever happens between you and Marcus, My granddaughter is my granddaughter. I had to press my fingers against my mouth for a moment before I could answer. "Thank you, Karen," I said. "That means a lot." "He's a fool," she said simply. "I love him, but he's a fool." We didn't talk long, but that call mattered more than I expected. It was one of the few moments in those weeks where something unexpected turned out to be decent instead of devastating. The thing with Greg Holloway resolved itself on a Thursday, 2 weeks after our coffee shop meeting, almost exactly on the timeline I'd asked for. Marcus was called into a meeting that morning and placed on administrative leave, pending an internal investigation into expense irregularities and undisclosed financial conflicts of interest. He was escorted from the building. His laptop and badge were collected. I know all of this because Jennifer's husband David texted Jennifer, who texted me at 11:47 that morning. It happened. I was at my desk at work. I was on a call with my team about a campaign launch. I saw the text, took one breath, and kept talking. The divorce took 8 months from the filing date. Patricia was thorough and merciless in the best possible way. She went after every asset, every account, every piece of documentation Dr. Park had flagged. The LLC was unwound. Robert, faced with his own legal exposure, cooperated fully with the accounting process. In the final settlement, I received the house, which I chose to keep for Lily's stability, a substantial share of the recovered portfolio assets, and child support calculated on Marcus's previous income, not the diminished one he tried to present after losing his job. Marcus got the debt from the attorneys. He got the consequences of what he'd built. He got, as far as I could tell, Tara, though I heard from Jennifer, months later, that that relationship had not survived the pressure of everything that followed. I didn't feel satisfaction about that, exactly. I felt nothing about it. Tara was not the point. She had never been the point. The point was the man who had stood in front of 60 people and smiled at her with the smile that used to be mine. Lily and I stayed in the house. I took down the string lights eventually, in early spring, when the weather turned warm enough to be out in the backyard again. I stood on the patio and pulled them down, strand by strand, and wrapped them carefully and put them in a box in the garage. I didn't throw them away. I'm not sure why. Maybe because the lights themselves hadn't done anything wrong. Maybe because Lily had helped me hang them, and she had loved how they looked, and I wasn't going to let her father's choices take that memory away from her too. She started seeing a therapist in January, a warm, practical woman named Dr. Mallory, who specialized in kids navigating family changes, and who Lily took to immediately. At the third session, Dr. Mallory told me privately that Lily was processing things with remarkable clarity for her age. "She's very grounded," she said. "She knows she's loved. That's the most important thing." I thought about the parking garage. I thought about the school pickup line. I thought about every moment I'd made the choice to function, to stay steady, to not let Lily see me fall apart. Not because I hadn't fallen apart, but because I'd done it on my own time, in private, and then gotten back up. And I thought, okay, that was the right call. Whatever else I got wrong, that was right. By summer, Marcus had found a new job, lower level, smaller company, somewhere in the western suburbs. We communicated through our attorneys for the first few months, and then, gradually, through a co-parenting app that Patricia recommended. He had Lily every other weekend and Wednesday evenings. The first few exchanges were stiff and strange, the way things are when two people who used to share a bed are now handing a child's overnight bag back and forth in a driveway. Lily handled it with the same steady gray eyes she'd always had. She hugged her dad, She got in my car, she talked about what they'd done, and I listened, and I didn't make it complicated for her. That was the hardest part, honestly. Not the legal process, not the financial fight, not even the long nights alone in a king-sized bed that eventually I replaced with a queen because I didn't need all that space anymore. The hardest part was watching my daughter love her father, uncomplicated and whole, the way children love parents before they understand what parents are capable of. And knowing that I would never take that from her. Not ever. Even though some nights I wanted to. Because she's going to figure it out on her own. She's already started. 9-year-olds understand more than we think they do. It's been 14 months since the anniversary party. The hydrangeas I planted along the fence came back this spring, big and full, purple-blue in the morning light. Lily has a new soccer team and a best friend named Zoe who sleeps over almost every Friday. I got a promotion, VP of Marketing, a title I'd been working toward for 3 years, with a salary that means the mortgage and Lily's 529 and my 401k and a small amount left over every month that I spend on whatever I want, which lately has been a ceramics class on Thursday evenings and occasionally a really good bottle of wine. I am not over it. I want to be honest about that. I don't think you get over something like this the way you get over a cold. You just build new things around the space it left, and eventually, the new things are more real than the whole. I'm working on that. Most days, I'm doing okay. What I know now that I didn't know then is this. The version of myself that stood at the edge of that patio and went very still, she didn't go still because she was weak. She went still because she was already calculating. Because somewhere, underneath the grief and the humiliation and the absolute gut punch of seeing that private smile aimed at someone else, she already knew. She already knew what she was going to do. Marcus thought my silence that night was surrender. He was wrong. It was the moment I decided to win. I'm the woman who gets up. I always have been. And the string lights are still in the box in the garage. But this summer, I think I might hang them again. Not for him. For me. And for Lily. And for the backyard that is ours now. Completely and finally ours. Some things you reclaim, and some things you just decide to keep.